Today is the 5th of August, 2011. My name is Wayne Clark. I'm with the New York State Military Museum and Veterans Research Center in Saratoga Springs. And we are in Saratoga today at the home of the Bazars. Sir, for the record, would you please state your full name and date and place of birth, please?
My name is Myron Bazar, and I was born in the Ukraine, and I came to this country when I was about 5 years old.
And whereabouts did you go to in this country?
I settled in Amsterdam, New York. My father was in this country before, and he brought me over. And he left my mother behind in the Ukraine, and they were divorced. So I lived with my father in this country. And since I was 5 years old, and I spent all my school years, high school, in Amsterdam.
What year did you graduate?
1941.
And let me ask you, do you remember where you were and what you were doing when you heard about the attack on Pearl Harbor?
Well, I'll start slightly before that. When I graduated from high school, the government had a program. The United States government had a program at that time. Very few people are aware of it. It's a WPA, Work Progress Administration. What the government was doing through Roosevelt, he thought that possibly we could enter this war in the future, the way it was going in Europe. So in every city, the government put up a building. And in this building, it was a machine shop. And he was training people. People were being trained voluntarily, if you want to join it, in how to operate lathes, shaving machines, and so on, at no cost. So in Amsterdam, the government put up a building which is still in existence, and with all this machinery, and I went in for training after I graduated from high school on different type of machines. And this carried me into the attack on Pearl Harbor. So when I was a civilian at that time, in November of 1941, I had a car. And it was a Saturday afternoon, and I was driving, listening to a football game at that time, Army and somebody else.
I mean, that was
in
December.
And the program was interrupted by a special announcement from Washington that all enlistments, volunteer enlistments into the Navy were terminated. Oh, I'm sorry. I've jumped my story. This was not in 1941. This was in 1942.
Okay.
In November.
This was after Pearl Harbor.
Right.
Okay.
My memory's not serving me properly.
No, that's fine.
And it said all enlistments into the military have been service is terminated, and from now on it will be the Navy will be under the draft system. And I always wanted to join the Navy. So what happened, I was only 2 blocks from the post office when that announcement came in, and the recruiting officer, naval recruiting officer, was in the post office. I went in and I told him I wanted to join the Navy, hoping that he never knew about this news, and he never knew it. So he signed me up, gave me a short medical check, and he says, you're in.
Now let me ask you, why did you pick the Navy?
Pardon?
Why did you want the Navy instead of the Army?
I don't know why. Maybe I thought the land war was too dirty for me or what, I have no idea. But I had a partiality because I always followed the Navy. When Roosevelt spent $1 billion increase in the Navy, you know, I was really enthused about the Navy.
Mm-hmm.
So what happened, Then I get a phone call Monday, and he says, you know what, there's an announcement that came from the government that all enlistments were terminated on Saturday, the day you came in. He said, well, and the recruiting officer, he got his rank by how many recruits he served.
Yep.
He said, what I'll do, I'll backdate it one day.
Oh, okay.
Say, don't tell anybody.
Mm-hmm.
So he backdated it, and I was in the Navy. He says, we'll pick you up, now this is in November. He says, we'll pick you up in end of December to take you to Newport, Rhode Island. So, in the meantime, I was working in a small factory which was manufacturing machinery for the Russians. And this machinery was boxes to make boxes for bullets. And the factory could only turn out 6 machines a year. So what happened, I was working in the year 1942 in this factory, and all of a sudden, the word came back with the factory. He says, we can give you a deferment. They didn't realize I joined the Navy. I was to join the Navy. And he said, we can give you a deferment because of those machines we sent to Russia in a convoy going to Murmansk, Siberia, was sunk by the Germans, and all the machines were lost. And he says, you'll get a 6-month deferment. We have to make 6 more machines. I said, fine. But in the meantime, when I heard this announcement, I joined the Navy.
Yep.
So what happened, in Albany, they put us on the train going to Newport, Rhode Island. And we got into Newport, and the buildings we were stationed at were built during the First World War. The important part in this was the ceiling height was only 7 feet. And that was, medically, that was improper for a bunch of sailors to be sleeping in this room. So they had a point that all the windows had to be open. And this is in January in Newport.
Oh my gosh.
Everybody for 3 months slept with their clothes on, due to the fact of the low ceiling.
Mm-hmm.
So I was a musician, and I played in different bands before I joined. I played in cowboy bands, big bands, Polish bands. I played in a symphony orchestra.
What kind of instrument did you play?
I played a clarinet and a tenor saxophone.
Ah.
So when at the termination, the reason I mention this, at the termination of my training at Newport, they said, you're lucky, you're going to be sent to Boston. I said, why? You're going to Wentworth Institute, which is a technical school, and it's been taken over by the Navy to train engineering aboard ship. And he says, the beauty part of this is you're going to stay in a 4-star hotel, the best hotel in the Back Bay section of Boston. The name of the hotel, the Somerset Hotel. So they took me to Boston. And this hotel was unbelievable. They kept the staff. They had the same kitchen, same chef, the same waiters, and they had a string orchestra of 8 pieces and a balcony and a dining room. And they always played for breakfast, they played for dinner. So, and you had a service and woman waitresses, the same food they served the civilians when the hotel was a civilian hotel. So this was unbelievable. Then at the top of this, the commanding officer of the Navy guys at the Wentworth has stated that you're a musician. I'm going to formulate a band. We need a band here because we had a certain amount of students. and the program was 4 months. So I was relieved of all duties. I had weekends off. I brought my car from Amsterdam to Boston. They had a garage to house the car.
Oh my goodness.
And every weekend I would take off in the car, either go home or whatever and so on.
What kind of car did you have?
I had a Plymouth. I bought it in 1941. It cost me $700. And it was a nice car. So I would travel back and forth, and in the evening, because I was relieved of all duties, in the evening I would travel around Boston. I made dates with different women and everything else, and it was a great life, considering the fact of stepping out of a recession, because the family I came from, it was kind of a middle-class family, not poor. And so then what happened when I graduated from Wentworth?
Now, let me just go back a little bit. What did you learn at Wentworth? What type of engineering?
Engineering, pumps, turbines, steering mechanisms, and refrigeration. Everything technically aboard, chemically aboard ship.
All right.
Then, upon graduation, they said, hey, the commanding officer told me, hey, you're a lucky guy. Washington's going to send you to Syracuse. I said, what for? He says, the Carrier Corporation. The Navy has a small school there teaching refrigeration and air conditioning. And you've been selected to go to Carrier. And the program's going to be, we're going to give you allowance, you live any place you want. The only thing, you have to be at work at 8 o'clock in the morning, and you're out at 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon from the school. You're on your own. Geez, I couldn't believe this life. And so I went to Carrier. There's only about 10 students. And they had teachers there from Carrier teaching us air conditioning, refrigeration, and all that. And then I would finish, and I would get in my car, and I'd go to my apartment, and I was subsidized for meals and the apartment and everything else. So that only lasted about 5 weeks. So what happened, upon graduation from Carrier, they say you're going to be sent to San Francisco. And it's a new construction. It's a fleet oil tanker. And it's under construction, and you're assigned to it to handle all the air conditioning. Well, they didn't have much air conditioning, just for some of the officers. And until the ship is complete. Then they couldn't tell me how long it would take. So they put me on a train for San Francisco. Now, the interesting part aboard this train is this. Very few people realize how the public was involved in this war. So the train would go in different stations to pick up water. I don't know how many miles you go, they stop at a watering because the train was wood coal fed.
An old steam engine.
Yeah, and there was a lot of steam, you lose a lot of water. And you had to supplement that water aboard that train. So when you start getting into the Midwest, you hit very poor, small towns where the water tower would be. And here's the interesting part. The train was stopped, and you get all these women from this poor village come to the train with food, everything they could possibly give you, which you might need. They give you clothing, like socks, sweaters, and they were so devoted to the country in relation to this war. They tried to do something good. They were too remote to be in a big city to do any good in the factory. The best they could do is give it to the troops. So you go there, you get sandwiches. They had everything there because the train would stop for about an hour. And you would get all this material if you want to take it. And I couldn't believe it. How these poor people were devoted to this war and devoted to this country. And giving something which they could very ill afford. So anyway, we land in San Francisco. And the ship was being built in San Francisco on a Kaiser plant, shipbuilding plant. And Kaiser was their hero at that time, turning out ships in a hurry. And he says, well, this is September. It's going to take at least 4 months. There's only 7 men, Navy men, which would be aboard the ship. You're one of the 7. All the rest is civilian workers. Your job is going to be to walk around and make sure everybody's working, nobody's sleeping, or whatever it might be. And we're going to give you allowance, a very sizable allowance for food and housing. Jesus, I couldn't believe this. I picked the best hotel in San Francisco. I was there in this hotel for 4 months, and food in the hotel, and all I had to do was be aboard ship at 8 o'clock in the morning and get out at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Oh, before that, I sold a car. I sold my car in Syracuse because being transferred to San Francisco didn't make sense. Yeah. They wouldn't allow it. I had to go aboard a train. So I got $1,100 for the car. I paid $700 in 1941. So I go aboard ship in that 4-month period. Never, they give you an armband, SP, shore patrol. It's like a policeman in the Navy. And for 4 months I couldn't find a person that was sloughing off, sleeping, and so on. Everybody was so patriotic. It was unbelievable. And at that time, the Americans, the feeling they had in this war was not Hitler. It was Tojo, because we got hit at Pearl Harbor. So the American had the feelings, we're going to get those Japs. We're going to get those Japs. Never speaking of Europe. And even when we got involved with the war in Europe, you know, it was never Hitler. Let Europeans take care of Hitler, we take care of Tojo. So after 4 months, that year, 1943, it was my best year of my life. It was so different, and it was so financially rewarding. I couldn't hardly believe it. So I get aboard a ship, and we were supposed to be with the fleet all the time, the new fleet. There were 2 fleets. The 3rd Fleet and the 7th Fleet. The 7th Fleet was the old vessels, old battleships. The 3rd Fleet was all the new stuff, the big battleship, New Jersey, and Wisconsin, and all the new carriers. We had about 12 carriers. And so because the new fleet was much faster, the old fleet was slower. So the old fleet was always left behind to pick up the loose stuff which the new fleet either invaded and bombarded, whatever it might be.
Now your ship was for refueling?
Yeah, we stayed with the fleet. As the fleet went out, we went with them, slightly in back. And they would go off for 2 months. They would bombard whatever they're going to invade, Marshall Islands, Saipan, whatever it might be. And they needed oil. Being out there for 2 months, the carrier needed gasoline. So we would supply them at that time in the ocean. We'd be out for 2 months, almost 3 months. Never see land, just with the fleet. And the fleet would come in close to the land they're going to invade. We would be farther back. We're totally out of the picture. although we're involved in that invasion because I had 6 battle stars. I'll speak of the islands we invaded. So what happened, the first trip we made was to Aleutians. They needed fuel for airplanes, they needed some oil for the ships. So we went up in the Aleutian Islands in the month of January. That was a disaster. It was so cold. The ship was 20,000 tons. That's what the ship weighed, unloaded. It was a big ship, about 600 feet long. And when all the ice froze on that ship, everything was frozen. We had to chop the ice off the walkways. We had to put ropes in walking areas, something to hang on to so you don't slip. So that lasted for a month. Then they sent us to Hawaii. Well, at that time, Hawaii was beautiful. There's a famous beach, Waikiki Beach. There were only 3 hotels. The Royal Hawaiian was the #1 hotel, and there was 2 others, but that's all there were. And so we're in Hawaii roughly for about 2 weeks, and it was very interesting because we met the 27th Division in Hawaii. The 27th Division came from the Albany area.
Troy.
It was Troy, Albany, Amsterdam, and
I think from Whitehall too.
yeah, let's see, I'm trying to remember. Well, anyway, it was the 27th Division. So I met a lot of guys from Amsterdam, and they were in Hawaii because they were taken into the service temporarily in 1941. The famous song at that time in 1941 is "Goodbye Dear, I'll Be Back in a Year." That was from our military. What do you call it? The military at that time. They still have it.
The National Guard?
National Guard.
Yes.
They were all National Guard troops. They were taken in by the government and for 1-year training. We were not in the war.
It was 1940, and then they...
Was that what it was, 40?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, I'm a little mixed up there. So I met all these fellows from Amsterdam, and they said, boy, this is a beautiful life. We've been here now, to correct to what you said was right. They said, we've been here almost 2 years, and we love Hawaii. But it was a bad statement. What happened? The first invasion after the Marshall Islands, we went to the Marshall Islands. We captured the Marshall Islands. Then they came back to Hawaii, and the next invasion was Saipan. Now they sent the 27th Division in 1944 to capture Saipan. Now that was a tough battle.
That was.
Very unusual battle. It involved civilians, how civilians committed suicide.
It was the famous bonsai charge there.
Yeah. So what happened, we were in the harbor of Saipan because that area was captured. And they were farther into the island. And the only time we go out of this harbor would be in the evening. And because the Japanese submarines would be in that area. So every time we go out, it was not dark yet, it would be like dusk. And Jesus, we got missed by a certain amount of torpedoes. And boy, if we ever got hit by a torpedo, a tanker,
oh, God.
It's like a bomb.
Yep.
So we missed a lot of torpedoes. We go back into the harbor. Now, next to Saipan was another island, about 4 miles separated the two, Tinian. That's where the atomic bomb airstrip was. And at that time, we didn't capture that island. We were trying to capture Saipan. So this is a funny story. On Tinian, we're in that harbor. On Tinian, the Japanese had one tank. And look, those Japanese tanks were like toys with a small gun and so on. So what would happen? From somewhere, this tank would come out. If you look into binoculars, it would come out from somewhere and shoot at the ships. The Navy had everything there. They had battleships and so on. Every time the tank would come out, boom, the world come to the end with all these guns unloaded from all these ships for this tiny tank. And you know, when they hit that island, there's so much smoke, powder, dust in the air, you couldn't see what happened till it settled. When it settled, you don't see a tank. Then all of a sudden, about 2 hours later, the tank would pop out again. This went on 6 times. Then the Navy would blast away, totally miss again. Then the tank is not there, he hides somewhere. Then he'd pop out, he'd shoot. 6 times before they got this tank. Well, anyway, what happened in Saipan, at the end of Saipan, the Japanese were desperate. They had no choice. They went into a banzai charge. And the 27th Division was right there in front of them. When they took off and started screaming, blowing horns and everything, I was not there, we were in the harbor. We could hear some of the noise, or we pick it up on the radio, which was being transmitted from the battlefield. And they took a banzai charge on the 27th Division. Now this is, it's known, but they don't publicize this. The 27th Division ran. They just took off and ran. They don't know what hit them. And I lost 2 good guys from Amsterdam, which I know very well. They got trapped, they got killed in this banzai charge. And that eventually was stopped. And of course they took the general in charge of the division. I don't know if he was a...
His name was Smith.
Is that who it was?
Yeah.
And they took him out of that area completely. Oh, you're totally aware of this.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, so that happened there. That was the end. And the tank was killed in Tinian Island. Then they sent us to the South Pacific. And they sent us to Guadalcanal. There still were Japs on the island, but there's no real fighting. And I remember this. In those islands, there are many, 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 many islands in the South Pacific. And Halsey had a sign, big billboard put up on one of the islands. Where you come into that area between 2 islands, you see this billboard lit at night. And the billboard said this: kill those bastards. They're no goddamn good, you know how Halsey talked. Kill Japs, you know, to build up your morale. Well, anyway, we hit most of the islands. A lot of those islands were still occupied by the Japanese. One island had 80,000 Japanese, but they're all bypassed. And they were starving, whatever it was, because they could not be fed by the Japanese fleet. Then after that, our next engagement was the Peleliu Island, which was south of the Philippines. And the reason MacArthur was in charge now, not the Navy, but he was using the Navy. And he wanted Peleliu because he needed an airstrip, because he made that proclamation, I shall return. Regardless what it was, he was going to return to the Philippines. And of course, as we know now, the Philippines should have never been captured. Never should have been taken by the Americans. It was not, they should have been bypassed. But MacArthur made it a point that the back of statement, I shall return. Well, the Peleliu was a big battle in relation to what the Japanese were. They were, for the first time, they would commit suicide when they were totally desperate.
Mm-hmm.
Not one Jap was captured. It was a tough battle. And that battle was it's never publicized. Anyway, we finally captured Peleliu. We got our airstrip. When the airstrip was finished, he invaded the Philippines. Well, we were involved in the Philippines. And once again, now the new Navy was involved. The old Navy was also involved because the Philippines, there are many islands. And they would bombard the coast, bombard the Japanese areas and so on, bombard that naval base. They used to be American. It was about 60 miles north of Manila. It's all bombardment until they invaded. And in that battle, what happened? We got a citation in this case. There were 3 American cruisers, light cruisers. They were close to Taiwan. At that time, it was known as Formosa. Mm-hmm. And they were hit by aircraft, and every one got hit by torpedoes in the critical area, but it didn't sink them, the 3 of them, but it damaged ruptured all their fuel tanks, and they were dead in the water. And we got a call to dash into this particular area, and they're patching up and so on to store fuel so they can get their engines going again and get out of the area. So they had these 3 cruisers, and there were Japanese airplanes in that area. They came over, they would drop bombs or they would miss. Bad shooting. Mm-hmm. But we filled the 3 of them. They got the engines going, they got out of the area. I forget the name of the cruisers are. But anyway, so we're in that Philippine area for quite a while. Then what happened when the Japanese were losing the war in the Philippines? The Japanese made a suicide policy from Japan. Their biggest battleship, I think it was the Yamato, I can't remember, 18-inch guns. Mm-hmm. It was the biggest ship at that time for any particular nation to have. And they sent this ship down into the landing area where the Lady Island, and they gave that ship enough of fuel just to get there. And they're supposed to beach that ship and use their guns for continuation of the battle to help the Japanese. And I think that was the Yamato. At that time, it weighed about 65 million tons. 65,000 tons. Mm-hmm. And as a ship was going down to the Philippines, it was spotted by the new Navy, the aircraft carriers. And the aircraft carriers went to work on it. They hit it with 18 torpedoes before that ship was sunk. We were not involved in the battle, we're out of reach of the battle. So, anyway, what happened after the Philippine campaign? After the Philippine campaign, we were scheduled to go to Tarawa. That was the next. During the Philippine campaign, the Japanese took part of their fleet as a diversion. And when they sent this battleship down with a certain amount of cruisers, and they sent a diversion north of Japan. And of course, we broke the Japanese code at that time for at least 2 or 3 years, so we knew exactly what they were doing. And what happened, Halsey was in charge of the 3rd Fleet, because the 3rd Fleet was rotated by Nimitz, Halsey, and somebody else. And Halsey was in charge. He was always looking for a fight. And he got waylaid by going in that direction. After that diversion, the Japanese were setting up there, whereas they were sending their main fleet into the Philippines to wipe out the landing areas and so on. This Halsey never knew. So we were with Halsey going north. And all of a sudden we got a word, turn around and go back. And we didn't know why turn around. So the whole fleet, Halsey, turned around and headed for the Philippines, quite a distance away. But he never got there in time. So what happened? The old fleet faced the main Japanese fleet. Okay, the main battleship was sunk by aircraft carriers. They had baby flat tops. And the biggest one they had there was the Princeton, which was sunk in that battle. The reason I knew about the Princeton, I had a good friend that was aboard that Princeton. So anyway, this battle raged in the Philippines. Halsey is still in the middle of the ocean, running south, never make the battle, and the 7th Fleet did extremely well. They stopped them, and I guess the losses were about equal, Japanese and American ships. And Halsey never got there in time. So then, anyway, as we know, we captured the Philippines. They went into this suicide situation. Now we're starting to learn what these Japanese were about, and we're starting to get highly concerned because the landing on Japan was very short in the future, and they knew we would have an awful lot of losses. And considering how the Japanese were, when they're pressed, they're desperate, and they fight the hardest. So next place we were supposed to be, that's when the doctor came into the picture with his cruiser. Atlanta was not Tarawa. What's the Iwo Jima? That was the next one. That's when the doctor was involved in the bombardment of that island, and we headed for Iwo Jima. And then we got orders to go back to the States. Why, I do not know. And we sailed back, and on the way back, about a day, about 10 hours out of San Francisco, or no, at that time we were going to San Diego, and the news came out that Roosevelt died. That was that time period. And so we had a certain amount of repairs.
How did you feel when you heard about the death of President Roosevelt?
Well, everybody was for him. Totally. And there's very few Americans. The job he was doing was a great job. Then, of course, we never knew about Pearl Harbor. Was that instigated by our government or wasn't it? It's still in the basement. And they were looking for an outlet to get into the war because Europe was in a very sad condition. France would belong to Hitler, and the only country left was England, and England had very little. So the picture for Europe was Hitler is going to take over totally Europe and England. And it got so desperate in this country that a lot of prominent people, manufacturers, start siding with Hitler. Did you ever know that?
No,
it's published. They started having meetings. Are we on the wrong side? Should we be with Hitler? And that's been published. And because it was such a desperate situation in this country in relation to Europe. The war was lost in Europe. England was wiped out. Hitler could take them anytime. Not realizing that Russia could stop Hitler, which they did. Russia, they say now, 90% of the war in Europe was based by the Russians. And then they did it. And of course my wife was involved in that area, a lot of things she knows, and of course she went through your program. And when Stalin, people were against Stalin, then Stalin made a new policy of fight for Mother Russia, you're going to lose your country. then mentally the people in Russia start changing their opinions. And they start fighting harder. Then, of course, as we know what happened, Stalingrad and all that, and the movements start going back. Well, anyway, we were in San Diego for a period of time for repairs, and that's the reason we went back to the States. Then we headed out again. And we never made Iwo Jima, never made any battle. Oh, Okinawa. We got involved in the Okinawa battle. And at that time, when we came back, Okinawa, they were still fighting. And we were in the harbor of Okinawa, and they give us land duty. You go out, you never go on land. You're always on the water. In fact, you develop a sense of smell. You can smell an island without seeing it, by the air, by the foliage, due to your sensitivity of this pure air in the ocean for 2 or 3 months. Well, anyway, the amazing part about Okinawa, all these little villages were destroyed. Externally, there were shacks. Internally, beautiful. All ceramic work, fabulous. The Japanese, or the Okinawans, it's an offshoot of the Japanese. The Japanese never did like them. And so internally, their palaces, they were so clean, the people so proper, unbelievable. It was a shame on all this destruction in Okinawa. So then, after Okinawa, we were always sent back to Hawaii. Then the ship was meant to go, we didn't know where. It's in debation where the ship was supposed to go. And it came to point system of getting out of the service. And I had enough of points because I went in 1942, and I had enough of points to get discharged.
And this is before Japan surrendered?
Yeah. Oh no, that's after the surrender. I'm
Okay.
sorry. I missed the main point. Okay. After Okinawa came to the bomb and so on, we were not in that area, and Japan surrendered. So they sent us to China. They sent us into the Yellow Sea, and the Yellow Sea is very strange. It's a big sea between China and Korea. And when you hit the Yellow Sea, it's a straight line, yellow and blue. That's where the Japanese current goes up into Japan. So we went into the Yellow Sea. We had a lot of close calls. The Yellow Sea was loaded with mines. The Americans dropped all these mines because there's a lot of Japanese shipping from China into Japan, because China, that part of China, Manchuria, was taken by the Japanese. There's a lot of mineral wealth, iron, or whatever it is. So we loaded the Yellow Sea, the airplanes loaded the Yellow Sea, the submarines, with mines. All you see is mines. You're dying. They float on top with points. And when you're going through, and we're on a tanker, we're loaded with material. And when we're going through, the only thing that saved us, they told us to go into the Yellow Sea to the city of Tientsin. Tientsin is on the river on the top of the Yellow Sea. And Tientsin was a big city, about 1 million population. So as you're going north, the wake of the ship, the mines were not anchored. They were free floating. And the wake, one mine was only 10 feet away. The wake was shoving over. It's like going through a minefield. Well, anyway, we never got hit. We got into China. We got anchored into Tientsin because the Marine Division was there. And there was about 2 or 3 Marine divisions. These are the tough guys that went through Guadalcanal and all that. Boy, you didn't give them any bullshit. Boy, they were tough. You meet them in bars in Tientsin, you know. They're like a bunch of animals. Unbelievable. You know, they were in the Pacific so damn long that their nature changed. So, and the fleet was out on the ocean patrolling. And the reason for all this in the Marines was the communists. The communists were moving into proximity of Peking. At that time, the big city was Peking. And so when the Marines were there, they didn't know exactly what to do. Throw them in and fight the communists, or show force. They might change their mind. So when we were there in the city, there's a lot of warehouses which stores a lot of equipment by the Japanese, which were illegal for the Chinese to have. And they had warehouses full of cameras, Zeiss cameras, the best cameras. There's thousands and thousands of cameras. So, and the Chinese were selling this. This is our national troops. They still own that Peking area. And they were selling for $10 each. You have fabulous cameras. So now we got cameras. You can never have them. You can never take pictures during the war. And the fleet is out there and they don't have cameras. So we would load up with cameras. And so when we fuel the fleet, we show them the cameras. They go berserk. How much do you want? $100. And they're loaded with money. There's no place to spend the money. So there was, send the money on the ropes. We're going in the ocean.
Yeah.
And we send back the cameras on the ropes. So we supply them with cameras. Oh, a point which I missed from the past. We had all this oil for the fleet going back into the war. We had all this oil for the fleet. Where did the oil come from? It came from the Arab states by the merchant marine. That was a civilian outfit. It was not a Navy outfit. And they would come, they would load up in Saudi Arabia or wherever the countries were, and they bring the water, oil, and it was all distilled in those areas. So we had diesel oil, we had airplane fuel, and we had a fuel for the ships. So we always meet out on the ocean. There's no place to land. And through different transmission pipes and all that, the oil will be transferred onto our ships. And they totally supplied all during the whole war from the Arab states to the fleet. Now, these merchant marine guys were smart. When they load up, they ship on oil, they load it up with liquor. We found out they paid $1 a bottle in the Arabian country. They would have thousands of cases of liquor. The captains, they never stopped this trade because, hey, they needed liquor, everybody needed liquor. So what happened, when we're side by side, we're unloading the liquor. And it's $1 a bottle. I don't know how many bottles. Oh, it was $30 a bottle. They paid $1 and they charged $30. So it was $30 a bottle. How many bottles in the case? I don't know. So all these cases are always unloaded onto the military ships. That's how the Navy got their liquor, right for those merchant marines. They probably had otherwise through airplanes, but the majority of liquor came from those ships. So while we're in China, the city of Tientsin had an international settlement. They had a Russian settlement. And the Russians had a factory, a vodka factory. And they made vodka. So they charged 35, it was 150 proof. And they charged 35 cents a bottle. Yes, 35 cents a bottle. It's 35 cents a bottle. So we had to sneak it aboard our ship because now it's a different situation. It's not the merchant marine. the fleet is out there and they need more whiskey. Whatever you could sneak onto our ships. When we meet the fleet, we tell them, hey, we got vodka, send it over. We're charging $35 a bottle. We paid 35 cents. Well, anyway, that's that end of that particular story. So anyway, in Tientsin, the Marines had a good deal. They would hire these women for $1 a day. They cleaned the tents, so they cleaned the buildings they were in and all that stuff. And once again, and there was a cat house in Tientsin. 5,000 prostitutes. Unbelievable. 5,000 in one huge building. And they had a line that ran a mile long of Marines and Navy guys because they haven't seen a woman for 2 or 3 years. And they said, this is another world completely. Now, I want to backtrack on my story into Hawaii, going back in 1944. There were cat houses in Hawaii. I'm sorry to say this, maybe you don't want to know.
Oh, no, that's fine.
And one of the whorehouses was close to a church. And that line of sailors, is most of the people in Hawaii were sailors. And most of the sailors would have a line. Speaking of lines, they go past the church for this house of prostitution. Then the civilians on the island start screaming, what is this? What is it? The native, you know what the hell to do. They know they sanction this because these guys are on the ocean. The submarine guys are out there for months. And that Royal Hawaiian tent was given to the submarine guys to sleep in on vacation. And the Navy tried to find ways how they can change all this, not eliminate it. It was never eliminated. I don't know how they changed it. I never went to one of those houses. Well, anyway, getting back into Tientsin, 5,000 prostitutes. And the way the families in China, unbelievable. Europe was bad after the war, the destruction. China was 100% worse. Unbelievable. The starvation, the poverty, and so on. And they'll be living in these shacks. And the families always stuck together. They never broke apart. If there's children, the children take care of their parents. Now, going back, and the houses inside were like castles. Outside there's shacks. They were so clean, so proper. Speaking of the Chinese. So, going back, I forgot what I'm supposed to say. I'm sorry to miss it.
That's right.
Well, anyway, from China, we were there when they signed the treaty. We left Japan when they signed the treaty. We're in a harbor. We're not involved in that treaty. And then we went bound to China, September, October. We were in China about 4 months. And we went back to Hawaii. And that's when the point system came into the picture. And I had enough of points to go, and I hated to leave my friends, but I decided to go on the point system. And then they put me on a LST, and from Hawaii I went to San Francisco. And from San Francisco, I went to Long Island. There's a discharge base there in Long Island, and that's where I got my discharge. But to continue the story involving this war, after I went into civil life, I found out the Navy had a preference system. They had all this material to sell, the public didn't have it, and they want to get all this material to the public as fast as possible. They had different companies sell this material in different parts of the country. Our area had 5 bases. Voorheesville, there was a huge base. Scotia Naval Base, another one. In Boston Spa, those buildings along the highway where the shopping center, that was all owned by the Air Corps for storage. And I find out about this, and they give you a special certificate, a preference certificate. You're a military, you could buy it. A civilian could not buy, a veteran could buy. So I didn't have much money, and I start buying material. And I bought an awful lot of jackets in Boston Spa, Air Corps jacket, those leather jackets.
Oh, yes.
$2 each. Well, the government would charge only 10% what it cost them when they had it made. A lot of that stuff was made in 1937, 38 during the Depression. The prices were given away prices. My problem was money. I should have got a partner, should have got a bank, but I was piddling. And then no problem, I bought a lot of stuff in Voorheesville and so on, and there were mistakes that were made on those sheets. There was so much material you could not see it. They have these long buildings with tables, and all the tables was paperwork, starting from A to Z. If you're looking for air conditioning, it's under A. So I find all this, I get this one sheet, and I couldn't believe what's on there. 25 horsepower motors and this and all that. It was a central air conditioning set, 5 of them all together. The price was $7.99. I'm stupid, I'm young. I go to the office of the company. I said, look, I want to buy this stuff, but you guys made a mistake. He said, there's no mistakes. And I'm forcing the issue like a dummy. I said, look, read this, read this. Is this $7.99? He said, what you say on that sheet, they don't read it. What you say, they're trying to get rid of the stuff.
Yep.
He said, what you see in this paper is what you get. I figured, I'm going to haul this stuff out to some farm and then forced to haul it back. You know, I'm thinking like a kid. Then I'm pushing it. He said, okay, come back tomorrow and let it check it. I come back tomorrow. They said, well, it's not $7.99 like what you got. It's $799. I couldn't afford it. I didn't take like a dummy, see. Well, anyway, I was in that surplus, peddling away. You put an ad in the newspaper and all the stuff goes in a hurry. But once again, all the jackets went up to the university at Lake Placid, where it's cold. When that wind hits, you know, the students freeze. And at that time, I sold the jackets to Tom Constantino. He had a noteworthy company in Amsterdam. He bought them. That's where he got him his start. He bought them all. He took them to the university. He sold them all in one day. Anyway, and then I figured I can't piddle around. I'm making some money, but nothing great. I figured I better go to college because they had a government, you know, they pay for everything. And I went to school and that cut out my surplus business. The problem was money.
Where did you go to college?
Alfred.
Okay.
In the western part of New York State. And anyway, and that ended it. And I went into a General Electric company for 3 years, and I was in a steam turbine test division, very good pay and all that. And then I found out a shortage of motels. There were no motels, no in the area, the western part of New York State. And I'm driving to work, I see these beat up hotels loaded with cars, the thruway is being built, and The people have not people sleeping in their cars. I figured, Jesus, there has to be a motel. That's, the word motel comes from Florida. So I go to a bank, I say, oh no, a motel in Northern area, no sir, that should be in Florida. So I got my father to give me $50,000 and I started a motel. The first motel in upstate New York. Nothing in Albany, nothing in Schenectady. First motel in Amsterdam. That motel was filled every night. And I was expanding, till I started out with 10 rooms. Then it wound up with 60 rooms. Then it called for a restaurant. And we felt not to make a motel restaurant, but an area restaurant. Because once again, there's no competition in Albany or Schenectady.
Okay, so, Myron, I'm going to stop you here. I'm going to change tapes. Okay, you were talking about the motel and restaurant.
Right, and we figured we had to make a restaurant that's totally different. Not based on a motel. We had the property is big enough, and there's a big waterfall on the property. A lot of beauty. And so we developed this restaurant, the Teepee Restaurant. And it's all glass and subject to a 40-foot big waterfall, trees growing inside. Rockefeller was president, was a governor at that time. He heard about this restaurant. He says, I want my major occasions, he told his staff, I want my major decisions to be in this restaurant because the Rockefeller was strictly outdoor people. And he became a customer of ours. And when he made a major decision that every city on the rivers of New York State had to have a filtration plant. That was a major one. There's a lot of money involved. And he said, I want to make it at the teepee. The water, the trees in the restaurant is all out of stone and glass. And that's where the press is there. Everybody's there. The governor of New York City is up there. So he makes that statement in the teepee restaurant. Eventually, we were building a house on the property, and we felt, that's where it started this. We felt we needed some paintings on the wall. We know nothing about paintings. And somebody says, well, go to Macy's in New York City. I'm in Albany, or one of the major stores in Albany. I don't know if it was Macy's or not. Here you go. It's all nice paintings, but a blue couch and a blue painting, red couch and a red painting. I said, wait a minute. I've heard about old paintings, and there's nothing in the area. Then luckily I ran across somebody, and he says, you know what? Go to New York City, go to Park Bernay. At that time it was Park Bernay, not Sotheby's. Sotheby's bought them up. You want old paintings? They sell old paintings there. So I go to New York City. we walk in on an auction. John Marion was the president at that time. And his father owned the company. And the item that went on the stage, $35,000, $40,000. I said, holy Jesus, I'm in the wrong building, you know. It sells for $70,000. I never knew old paintings sold that high. Then as we went along, we found out there were cheaper material. And you get to talk to people there. And luckily we met one dealer. He says, you know what? American art is a giveaway program. Nobody's buying American art. All Americans, they're stupid. They don't know any better. They buy European art. Well, of course, European art, American art is always second rate to European art. But American art, the people are going to get back to their own, get back into their history. The paintings in the area, Yellowstone, pictures, this is America, this is not Europe. He says, buy American art. And American art was so cheap, we could afford it. And every cent we had making in a restaurant, we start pouring into art. And the reason was, we go to one auction, the painting is sold for $1,000. Okay, 6 months later, same painting in the auction, same painting sells for $3,000. And it escalates up. I said, this is unbelievable. The way the American, this is what the guy said, the way the American art is selling. So we start buying American art. Now, and we always were broke. We never had money. Every cent we had, we pour into American art. Now, we're in a class of roughly up to $5,000 now. Because we're starting to learn about art.
Yep.
And we're starting to buy decent art. And so what happens, to make a long story short, we stored all this art. You wouldn't believe what happened. We had about 600 paintings. Not all of them, there's a lot of junk in there. And most of the art went up 50 times. If you paid $1, you got 50 in return when we put it into auction.
Yeah.
And one painting, I won't mention prices, it's too much bragging. One painting we bought, it brought into millions of dollars. Now that's a painting we could afford, and that's how it jumped. And when I went to that auction, I still try to, I won't mention prices. When I went to that auction, they had an estimated value at Sotheby's. No, that was sold at Christie's. They had an estimated value. It ran in the millions. I won't mention that figure. They says, Christie's called me. I said, okay, put it into auction. And Christie's called me about 3 weeks later. He said, we got a problem here. He said, this painting, we get a phone call. Oh, I want to stop this conversation. It goes as a matter of record.
Do you want me to stop it?
I don't want to say anymore.
Okay. Let me ask you, once you got out of the service, you mentioned about going to school, going into business. Did you stay in contact with anyone you were in the service with?
Did I stay in contact with who?
Any of your friends from the service?
No. We never, till about 15 years ago, they had a ship's reunion and from Chicago. Somebody from board a ship, which I knew, they would have a yearly reunion of that ship. But the problem was on these reunions, the first crew that went aboard that ship, I was in the first crew. They rotated the men because they needed men, experienced men, so badly for the Navy. There's so many ships being built, they couldn't get experienced help to supply the ships. You couldn't put a guy in the Navy and all of a sudden they put him on the ship. You had to teach him. This is not the military. The Navy was technically more inclined. You had to be a technical person, either outdoor, indoor, whatever. And so the first crew only lasted 6 months. And they started dispersing. They put them on other ships. Their experience after 6 months.
Now you were known as a plank holder, right?
Yeah.
Because you were with the ship from the beginning.
Right. And then then when you have your class reunion, you don't know exactly, you would lose track of these guys because it was so short of a time they was there I was you.
I see.
So it was a constant rotation. And much of that rotation, believe me, was due to seasickness. Some people that were in the Navy, like the first cruise we had going to Hawaii, the people we had that get seasick, Unbelievable. They knew the Navy were useless to them. They had to put them on land-based operations. And I was going to mention something about seasickness. Oh, we went through the worst typhoon ever. The typhoon in the Pacific is called a hurricane here. Mm-hmm. So this one typhoon that hit, and that was in 1944, in the Taiwan area or Formosa area, the waves were 60 feet high, and we had a ship that's 20,000 tons. You know, geez, it's like a cork. And you see these guys lined up along the rail, throwing up. I didn't get seasick, I don't know why, but I did once. Mm-hmm. And what happened, these old-time sailors, these chiefs, you know, they see this line of guys on the rail throwing up, they would come, they would holler out, okay guys, breakfast, we're having oysters this morning, this evening. Guys would have a double shadow thrown up over the side of the ship. Well, that pertains to the typhoon. We went through it. In that typhoon, we lost 3 DEs, destroyer escorts. They rolled so badly that their masts hit the water. And a lot of them capsized, 3 capsized. There were many ships which they lost up, smaller ships, destroyers. Many ships lost their masts. When they rolled against these huge waves, it would snap off all the masts. And they claimed that was the worst typhoon they ever had in their area up to the present time. Then, of course, as I mentioned to you during our coffee break, an interesting point, when we were in the Coral Sea. The Coral Sea is between New Guinea and Australia. And the Coral Sea can be so calm at times, it looks like a mirror. There isn't a ripple in that ocean. Any ripple there is made by the ship. Then somebody mentioned, oh, the gun went off, 5-inch gun. Say, what happened? They spotted a sea serpent 4 miles away. And that sea serpent, we could see it. It came up in loops, down, up, down, up, down, up. When you can spot something like that 4 miles away, it had to be huge. Huh. And the gun crew kept on firing bad shots. And we figured we're in trouble with that 5-inch gun. These guys don't know how to shoot. They never hit it. Then the next interesting point besides the war, we're in the mid-Pacific. In the middle of the night, the ship rams something and knocks everybody out of their beds. It was so bad. And the captain thought it was a torpedo, but he didn't hear an explosion. He couldn't understand what, he said maybe we rammed a semi-submerged submarine. And it was so bad we had to return to Hawaii. We couldn't send somebody over underwater to see. We couldn't stop the ship. We were in a war zone area. And they couldn't send somebody over and go down to see. Nothing penetrated the ship. No holes in the ship. But he felt that we should go back to Hawaii and have it checked because it was so bad, because it disturbed everybody. It knocked them out of beds. We get in Hawaii, nothing. So they figured we hit a sleeping whale. Huh. And a huge sleeping whale.
Huh. Now, didn't you have a story about flying fish or something too?
Oh yes. In the Pacific, you had schools of flying fish. And there always been schools. There'd be thousands of them. And when you were going through, all of a sudden it was like the sky turns black. They don't go very high, maybe about 10 feet. And it's all flying fish. And they don't have a course of going. If the ship's in the way, they go straight. When it hits your ship, you're loaded with flying fish. The story I gave to the fellows in the coffee shop is, at that time we were transporting on above deck a Marine division, a partial Marine division. And they were all sleeping above deck because the weather at that time was beautiful. At night, when the flying fish hit that ship and hit those Marines, they jumped up with their guns and they started shooting. They never heard of flying fish. And the next point about not pertaining to the war, twice. At night, you get in that warm climate, you know, you want to sleep, you're not air conditioned. And the ship is steel, it's hot. And at night you sleep above deck. There's a lot of pipes above deck. They sleep on the pipes, in between the pipes, and so on. And you hit a tsunami. And those two tsunamis, later on we found out came from Alaska, from an earthquake. And when that wave hits you, we would be 16 feet above the water. That wave goes over the top of the ship. Now you got all these guys sleeping. We didn't lose anybody. Medically, yes. It wrapped the guys around the pipes and everything else. The second tsunami we got hit with was we were open to a hatch which led to the main deck, and there was a radio there. And Tokyo Rose was given a big lecture on the deficiency of the American troops. They were all listening to the radio, and all of a sudden that open hatch, total water pours in. Unbelievable, with a lot of force. It knocked all the guys, all the hell, all the clothing went into the drains and so on. It was another tsunami that went over the ship. At that time, we didn't know what a tsunami was. They just called it a big wave. And most of the waves at that time, the ones were that came from Alaska area, from the Aleutian Islands and so on. So technically, Wayne, you got the high points of my story.
Okay.
And I'm still trying to find this fellow. He's going to be very important to you. Still trying to find his phone number of this fellow in Lake George. Because he probably he was in that carrier, I forget, a major air carrier that was in all the battles. And he was on it, and he says, yes, the only thing is, he was with Vanderbilt. At Vanderbilt, somebody had, his horse was coming up at a sale, and he started talking, and somebody came up to Vanderbilt and says, your horse is going to be sold. And so he dashed off, a lot of people, we lost track. But the fellow gave me his telephone number. He says, I want you and your wife to come up and see me. And he explained that. He said, I never got injured in that crash against the flight deck of that carrier. He never told us why he went in that direction. Then I forgot all about it to look for it, but I will look for it. And if I find it, I hope he's still alive. He was maybe in his 20s at that time. He must be pretty close to 90 by now.
Okay. Let me just ask you one more thing. Did you join any veterans organizations like the VFW or
No, because the reason is, even now, if for me to come to coffee, it's tough. I miss it. We're so busy. We had the restaurant going, we had the motel going, we had the art business going. The big business turned out to be the art business. And the art business is not local. We had a dash to New York all the time, Sotheby's or Christie's. Totally busy. We're more busy now than we ever before. The reason being, both sons went into art. Okay, there's a lot we know they don't know. Then one son is building up in Lake George now. So we're helping out the Lake George. They have different sales. Come to the auction. What do you think of this painting? We're more busy now, Dean, than we were back then. We had never had time. I joined our outfit, the Elks. in Amsterdam for the sake of being involved. I never went to a meeting. They said, come to the meeting, come to the meeting. Then I said, I'm paying all this money, and I'm going to step out. They begged me to stay. We need the money, we need the money. That's how bad it was. Yeah. Never joined one organization, even church. If I had it added up, I only went with we're Catholic. If I ever had it added up, I would say we go to church every other Sunday. Mm-hmm. And now, back then, we couldn't even go to church. When you finish New York, you got a lot of book work to do. What shall we do? Let's find this artist. Isn't he book? Hi, let's find the books where he's selling that. Because you're spending money. You're spending money. You make the wrong. Our business is a wicked business. It's so much phonies going on. Back when we were buying American art, it was cheap. There were very few phony American art paintings. Everything was going on to European paintings, duplicated, impressionistic, could be very easily copied. Then the American public started getting involved in the art. That's when art shot through the roof. Mm-hmm. Now, American art signatures were put onto a lot of paintings. Is it the right signature? And every piece takes a week, takes time. Never had time. The only time I make is what I do in a property. I like to do my own work. Uh-huh. What I do in a property, the property's big, it's a lot of work. And to make the coffee break, it's a problem. I make it. And because I knew Phil for a long time. Phil is an artist. He does a lot of restoration for me. And so otherwise, like I would join Ken's organization, I can't. If I join, it's only a gift of giving him money. Yeah. And art business takes money. It's something you don't get into. You got to get into it when you have money. That's why we're broke all the time. Even though we had a successful business, motel, 60 rooms, a restaurant, unbelievable. Where the people came from Europe. Albany was our biggest crowd. But it took time. Mm-hmm. Time, 24 hours a day. You don't finish like a certain hour. You get phone calls and all this. People call you 2 o'clock in the morning. I left this. And so on. Then the Rockefeller gave us a lot of publicity. When we still stayed in, we had a fire. We lost the main building. We lost, I'll mention the price now, we lost $2.5 million in art and everything else. We're insured for $100,000. We took a hell of a financial beating. But what I'm going to say, and the whole building that went down, there was about 20 rooms that went with it. The house went with it. Luckily, we had a special building for the art. Mm-hmm. But we had a lot of very important art in that building that was lost. Then I figured after the fire, is it beautiful? We work it against taxes. Dumb. The government only pays you what you paid for. It's not what it worth today. Wow. It's different than machine tools. It's completely different than machine tools. Why they make it different, I don't know. I based my opinion on machine tools. Uh-huh. They said, no, one painting, I paid $50 for it. It was worth $10,000. It was worth $10,000. The government will only deduct $10. So the losses were really great. Nothing gained. Insurance was very low and so on. So we kind of fell back in art. Tried to get them, didn't have the money and so on. The restaurant was still going and held us up. But they didn't mean anything. You make all this money, it's going into art, going into art. And the opinion we had, you hold it. Mm-hmm. Because like you find something valuable, I'm not going to sell it. Why not? Not because you love it. You can love it, but it's going up in price. It's so different. Mm-hmm. You know the business. Mm-hmm. That's exactly what happens in art. American art. We never sold a piece. Now we're starting to sell some pieces. But We get a lot of proposition. We'll give you this, we'll give you this money, big profits. No. It's going up so much faster. In 5 years, we get back what he offered. See? So it's a beautiful business you're in. But to get into big, you know, it's a very unusual business. Regardless what it is, art, material things and so on, because demand is getting greater, even during the recession now. Art didn't go down. Art goes up. During the major depression in the 1930s, the country went down 50%. Everything you owned went down 50%. Art went down 25%. The rich, most of the rich have art collections. What are they? Art connoisseurs? No. Their accountants tell them, buy art. Buy art. And buy it in cash. Buy it in cash for the ultra-rich. Now, I never sold to Rockefeller, but I know dealers that sold to Rockefeller. They said when you bring a painting in, he sees it, he likes it, he's going to buy it. He goes in the back room, not to get a check, he brings the cash. What happened? Rockefeller runs for vice president, remember? And he had to give his financial statement. This is very interesting.
Is it okay to tape this?
Pardon?
It's okay to tape this part?
Yeah.
Okay.
So what happened? He gives his estimate he's worth $150 million. Everybody feels sorry for him. And there's a breakdown. What brings up to $150 million? He has art, $30 million. You know what that collection was worth, what the dealers told me? $1 billion. See? Now, the money, that's where the money is. With the people, rich, ultra-rich people. They have so much money stashed away, they don't know where to put it. Art is a place to put it. My son went to college with a kid. His father was in a labor union in Detroit. I don't know what, he was a powerful at that time, I don't know the name. And he told his family, I have this art. I paid $20 million for it in cash. If anything happens to me, in case he gets shot or whatever, get it out of the house. Take it out of the house. And that's all he knew. The son gives a call to Walter. He said, my father died from a heart attack. What do I do? He says, well, you take it out of the house. You store it. And I says, what do I do in the house? You bring out one piece at a time, pass the word, not print. This fellow, I told some dealer, this fellow has this, and most of the art was in the millions. And you do that, my son told him you have a line to your front door, pound away with cash, with suitcases full of cash. That type of business, as you know, a lot of it is cash business. A lot of it is cash. And a lot of people, yes, I'll drop this price if you give me cash. Most of the dealers. The best investment, I'm not trying to tell you investments, you're old enough, you're smart enough, is a valuable piece. Hold on to it. If you have a family, you give it to them. What does it cost you? You can put it in the closet, millions in the closet. It's not in the stock market. And give it to the children. It goes out of the estate. That's what the ultra-rich are doing. A lot of that money goes into a closet. When they die, Of course, they changed the laws, and now the laws are going back again with the ultra-rich on possession of property. And so you can transport an awful lot of money without government not doing it. This is the underlying situation. You might know it, Phil, Wayne, or you might not. But a valuable piece, you'll never sell it. You give it to the family. You give it to them because it's always going up price. Right now the country is 300 million people. Well, it's going to be 500 million people before that child grows up. And what does that mean? More demand, shortage of material, and so on. That's where the big money is. The big money is not working for somebody. I'm sorry, because you work for somebody. It's not a disrespect.
I understand.
I only respect your knowledge. And so you'll find anything you can, instead of investing in the stock market, unless you need money from day to day, you invest something valuable. And look for the most valuable piece you can afford. Now, don't get the mentality, oh, this is $5,000. Oh, no, you have $20,000 in the bank. Oh, no, $5,000 is too much. That's a mistake. You paid $5,000. Now, the story if you have the time.
Sure.
The story I was going to tell you about Canada.
Oh, let me just wrap this up.
Okay.
All right, thank you so much for your...
Oh, by the way, what I'm telling you about this art and the rich people, to erase that.
Okay, all right.
Erase that stuff.
Okay.
I thought you had it dead.
All right.